Well, hi there. So in this video, we're going to do extra practice module 33. And this one's all about inflation and price levels and kind of extending those concepts about different ideas about deflation, inflation, that kind of thing. Check your understanding. Number one says, suppose there's a really large increase in the money supply and in a country that previously had had really low inflation. As a consequence, aggregate output rises in the short run. What does this say about situations in which the classical model of the price level applies? So we think back, there's this classical model where basically the two aggregate supply curves are the same thing and they're just a vertical line. And that tells us that, like, if aggregate demand were to change and money supply changes and all that, they would instantly be reflected in just higher prices. That's what the classical model is. But the scenario that we just were given was where the money supply changed and then people like changed the amount of stuff that's being produced. Aggregate output actually changed, and that only happens if you have that low inflation period where people are kind of sensitized to only low levels of inflation. But in the classical model, the situations where it would apply, right? Classical model applies in situations. Let me kind of write this. Let me actually say it, and then I'll just kind of write it out. The classical model would apply in a situation where you have really high inflation levels, where there's large increases in the money supply regularly happening, and basically they double the money supply, and then it doubles the prices instantaneously, and so you don't see aggregate output moving around, and so it works really nicely for those situations. But it doesn't describe a country like this one where they're kind of used to lower levels of inflation, because in those circumstances, if you increase the money supply, people will respond differently. So classical model applies in situations of high inflation, um, right? Regularly, where kind of people people kind of expect large changes in the money supply, and that causes people basically when those situations they go, you know what, the Fed did that 2 weeks ago. We just round up all the zeros, right? So it doesn't change any output in those situations. Number two says, suppose that all wages and prices in an economy are indexed to inflation. Can there still be an inflation tax? And when you think about an inflation tax is when the government allows inflation to rise, and it basically allows them to facilitate their own borrowing and their own spending, but it erodes the value of everybody else's money. So, like, if we have twice as much inflation, then in the government that owes all this money to all these different people, it's much easier for them to pay it back. So that's why they would do it. But it taxes the savings of people, and so even if you wage and you like adjust all the prices and wages and everything in the economy, it still is harmful. So the answer is yes, because inflation tax erodes erodes the value of money, and we'd say that savers, right? Savers are hurt. And so we can actually kind of say that like, even if you were to index all the prices and wages in the economy, yeah, it would protect the people who are working and the people who are kind of buying stuff, but it doesn't account for the fact that, like, I've saved up $1 million for retirement. And then the government comes along and allows really high inflation, and now my $1 million isn't worth very much anymore. So that's why that one's still a problem, even if you indexed a whole bunch of things to inflation. Let's take a look at these multiple choice questions. First one, I'm just going to tell you right off the bat, I don't like this question. It does not have anything to do with the material in our class. So I'm going to X that one out and say don't worry about it. Number two, the classical model of the price level. I think I actually mentioned this in when we talked about number one. Only the short run supply curve is vertical? No, both the short run and the long run curves are vertical. It's probably more technically accurate just to say that, like, there's only one aggregate supply curve and it's vertical. But I see what they're kind of getting at here, and they're basically saying the short run is the long run in the classical model. So the short run that doesn't exist for the classical model. So really, it's B is the right answer here. Probably be better for them just to say there is only one aggregate supply curve and it's vertical. The classical model of the price level works really well in countries with high inflation. So that's C for that one. Number four, an inflation tax is not imposed by governments. It's not done that way. It's not paid directly. It's the result of a decrease in the value of money held by the public. So C is the answer here. The other is generally levied by states. It's not levied at all. It's just it exists when inflation is allowed to rise, and it's higher when periods of higher inflation, not lower. The last thing, number 5, is another one where you don't need to know it. The correct answer for it is seigniorage, which is A on that one, but you don't have to know that one, so don't worry about it. Number 2, free response. Number 2 says draw correctly labeled graph of ADAS. Show the effect of an increase in the money supply according to the classical model of the price level. Ooh, okay. So YPL and then LRAS. So this is interesting. I'm not 100% sure if they want me to do it this way, but I'm going to do it this way, because if it's the classical model, then these are the same thing. So that should be drawn just kind of that way. And so if the supply of money goes up, we can say we know the interest rate will go down. That's the money market thing happening. And we'd know that therefore, consumption and investment go up, therefore AD goes up. And this is where it kind of gets interesting in those situations, right? Output didn't change. We stayed at YF, right? But the only thing that really changed was prices went higher. And in fact, it should be a proportional increase, like into the amount of, if it's a 10% increase in the money supply, it should be a 10% increase in price levels. Okay, hopefully that helped you. See you next time.